My name is Ala Dragola, and I'm the Director of Parliamentary Affairs and SME Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and I'm pleased to be moderating today's webinar. We have a very special panel of speakers here to discuss the diverse realities of businesses that are grappling with the pandemic. We'll also take a look at how local, provincial, and national chambers, business owners, and Canadians can work together to support local through the pandemic and into recovery. This important discussion is also coinciding with the Canadian Western Bank's newest full-service banking centre and first physical branch in Ontario that has recently opened in Mississauga. I'd also like to highlight our event partners from our local chamber network, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the Mississauga Board of Trade, who are here with us today. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. From the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, we have our President and CEO, Karen Beattie. From the Mississauga Board of Trade, we have David Wojcik, President and CEO. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce, we have Rocco Rossi, President and CEO. Very excited to have with us from CWB Financial Group, Chris Fowler, President and CEO, and Mark Stafford, Vice President and District Manager. I would also like to say thank you to the CWB Financial Group for its ongoing support of the Canadian Chamber and for being today's event sponsor. Before we begin, I want to give you an opportunity to share a few words with us. Chris, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks, Ala. Just knowing that we have been in Ontario for many years, and I'll speak more to that later, but just for those of you that don't know us, we are a Schedule A full-service chartered bank with national reach. We are a bit of different bank in that we focus on business owners. 80% of our business is focused on commercial lending, and 20% is on personal lending. So a different focus as our big peers in Canada take. To support our business, we have a tremendous investment in technology, a full rollout of a digital front end that's coming forward into the market, and really a growth focused in our bank. I joined the bank in 1991, so a few years ago. Balance sheet was 400 million, and today it's 33 billion. So we have a very strong growth record, very targeted in our approach in that business owner category. Really looking forward to dealing with businesses that are looking for commercial banking, cash management, and really adding into that personal banking, wealth management, and trust services. We made a great acquisition this year of a company based in Toronto, Montreal, TE Wealth and Leon Fraser. So just brought a tremendous amount of a great team and staff to really support, again, how we think about a business owner as they think about their commercial banking, their cash management, their personal banking, their wealth management, and our ability to provide those financial solutions. So looking forward to the day today, and back to you, Ella.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that great overview. And to start off our discussion, Perrin, I'm going to come to you first. Businesses of all shapes and sizes have been impacted by COVID, but the discussion always really seems to focus in on SMEs. Can you tell us why this segment of the business community has been so acutely hit, and what role you see government and what role you see for the private sector in helping SMEs navigate this new reality?
Ella, what we saw right around the world, whether it was in China initially or in northern Italy, or when it came to North America, is that SMEs were the hardest hit for a number of reasons. The first is often they don't have the resources to prepare for crises which may be arising. But beyond that, they don't have the deep pockets that some larger organizations have. And as a consequence, without the cash reserves that are able to support them in times when they don't have income coming in, they're particularly hard hit. In addition to that, SMEs have been on the front lines across the country, particularly at the retail level, or restaurants would be another example of that, anybody in the hospitality sector. And as a result of lockdowns that have taken place across the country, they're being particularly hard hit. If you take a look at restaurants, for example, the average restaurant in good times has a profit margin of about 4 to 6%. But these aren't good times. We've got social distancing and in many cases closed downs entirely. And as a result, they've been particularly hard. Similarly, for the stores along main streets in Canada, um, many of them have missed out on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and larger companies are often online where smaller ones aren't. In addition to that, we're into the Christmas season now, and with lockdowns taking place, many of these retailers are going to miss their most important time of the year. So as a consequence, small businesses have been particularly hard. That means that governments have to assist them to make it to the other side of the river when we can start to reopen the economy again and resume more of our ordinary lives. And it also means that organizations like chambers of commerce and larger businesses, banks and others need to be there to provide support, advice, and assistance to help to ensure that they can survive.
That's really interesting. And Rocco, I mean, Perrin kind of touched on some of the issues where, you know, businesses are on the front lines and they've been dealing with a variety of seemingly ever-changing rules and regulations and restrictions. And we've really seen this play out in the Peel region. How do you think Ontario businesses have handled the pandemic overall, and what supports do you see that are still missing?
Well, first of all, I want to thank CWB for physically coming into Ontario. I think it's a great vote of confidence in the size and importance of the Ontario economy. I think also that access to capital and a little competition in that providing of capital to businesses never hurts. So really, really delighted on that front. Look, entrepreneurs and business people are risk takers and they're innovators. And so they have done a remarkable job using that word that is used every day now, and that is pivoting. They've been forced effectively to take e-commerce plans that they may have had for the next 3 years and do them in 3 weeks. And yes, governments have moved far faster than they're designed to. I mean, the reality is all levels of government are designed to move slowly on purpose because you're supposed to go through committee, you're supposed to test everything. And COVID has basically said that playbook just won't work. You have to put your best idea possible forward and then be willing to iterate. And that's where the chamber movement has been so important, and the willingness at all levels of government across all party lines to listen and move, so that you saw wage subsidy programs go from 10% to 75%. And then the rent subsidy program, which has been particularly critical for SMEs because, you know, the polite word is profit insensitive costs, i.e. the checks you have to write whether you're making money or not. At the top of the list for most small businesses is rent. And the earlier iteration of the rent subsidy program, really made no sense. Trying to offload it onto landlords to administer the program was totally unfair, totally unworkable, and having a tenant-driven one is key. Totally agree with Perrin. We need to have those supports to keep people to the other side, but as important as government supports are, no business I know gets into business wanting to live off the government. They have ideas, they have products, they have services that they want to sell to people and other businesses. So the single best thing we can do is help make their cash registers sing, buy it online, get curbside, buy gift certificates, buy local, or say goodbye to local.
For sure. And David, I want to turn to you for a second because, you know, I'm so excited to have the Mississauga perspective here, just because the city's business community is so diverse. Mississauga houses both, you know, headquarters of various Fortune 500 companies, as well as a plethora of SMEs. Can you speak to, you know, or give us an overview of what are some of the top issues that you've been hearing from Mississauga businesses pandemic, and how this has differed from the main issues that they were dealing with pre-COVID?
Well, thanks, Alan. First of all, I want to welcome CWB to Mississauga and to the Mississauga Board of Trade family. And I also want to thank the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for hosting today so we can bring this Mississauga perspective forward. You mentioned our city is host to over 60 Fortune 500 Canadian headquarters and in total 70 Fortune 500 companies. We're also home to the Mississauga International Airport, as some people refer to it as Pearson, but our former Mayor Hazel McCallion liked to call it Mississauga International Airport. Some people have said MIA is not a good call sign for an airport, but we'll skip over that. That's the Canada's busiest airport, and we're the center for the second largest life sciences cluster in the country. Let's not forget the 40,000 bricks and mortar businesses and the 50,000 other SMEs that have their base here in Mississauga. So throughout the pandemic, we've conducted weekly surveys with 6,000 business professionals. And two of the questions that we posed, what's the near-term risk to your business? And what's the post-COVID risk to your business? So 37.8% said that revenue was their near-term risk factor, followed by cash flow at 21%. The post-COVID risk factor had revenue up to 55% of a risk factor, with capital and talent coming in at 15% and 12% respectively. However, our greatest challenge at the moment is having Mississauga combined with Peel Region with respect to COVID cases and being in that gray lockdown zone. This single condition has put tremendous stress on all businesses, but especially on our restaurant sector. Interestingly, our restaurants have been virtually closed to in-house guests for the past 3 weeks, and this restriction has had zero effect in reducing the number of daily positive cases of COVID. So we have to conclude that the transmission of COVID is not harvested in the business community, but in the civilian community. And this is a threat to our businesses that must be addressed immediately. So that's the Mississauga perspective at the moment, Paula.
Thank you, and I think that you touched on a lot of the really critical issues that Mississauga encompasses because of the diverging sectors that play out there. Chris and Mark, I want to turn it over to you and say, what made you choose, or what made CWB choose Mississauga as their first physical branch in Ontario?
Well, just the opportunity is fantastic. We've actually operated in Ontario with, as I mentioned before, 6 businesses. And 10 years ago, we had about 6% of our total assets in Ontario, and now we have 23%. So significant growth that we're supporting in Ontario, and really looking for the opportunity. So Mississauga made complete sense, given the density of businesses, and particularly SMEs. I mean, that business owner client is our absolute target that we're looking to provide those financial solutions to, and our ability to deliver full service banking. And as we think about a great place to start with boots on the ground brand, and Mark is our leader, and he'll speak later too. Just a great team, great location, and really looking forward to Mississauga being kind of the start of a bigger presence in Ontario.
That's great, and I think it's a testament to the city, that CWB picked Mississauga as its first physical branch. I mean, you've been in Ontario for a while now, but I think that's great. And David, I kind of want to come back to you right now and just hone in on that diversified economy opportunity that Chris just spoke to. Because Mississauga does house businesses in virtually every sector aside from farming. And what's really interesting to me is that you're really going to see that K-shaped recovery that economists love to talk about really playing out on the ground throughout the city. And you spoke to this a little bit about the short-term risk factors and what's going to be coming post-COVID. But can you speak to how Mississauga or the Mississauga Board of Trade is planning for short, medium, and long terms for these diverging sectors, the ones that are doing well and that are growing, and the ones that are still struggling and still trying to just survive, such as restaurants that we've mentioned?
Well, you're absolutely right. That K-shaped recovery that economists refer to, where we have so many businesses that are doing so well and so many businesses that are not doing very well. But to address the recovery, at the Mississauga Board of Trade, we've created a Mississauga Economic Recovery Group, or MERGE for short. This is a group of 37 presidents, CEOs, principals, and managing partners who have come together in 6 sectors to collect and action data to address the current post-COVID economic recovery in our city. So recently, the Mississauga Board of Trade, we stepped up to offer fee amnesty to all of our members in the hospitality sector. And on December the 18th, we've assembled a roundtable with our elected officials at all 3 orders of government to lay out a multi-step detailed list of asks, which are completely within the power of 1, 2, and in some cases, all 3 levels of government. So I think it's incumbent upon the business community, I'll back up. What's incumbent upon government is we know that there's not enough money, the government doesn't have enough money to make an economic recovery happen. Doesn't have it. But what they do have the power to do is to create an environment that makes business able to function and be part of that economic recovery. So that's what our plan is. It's really being received well. We look forward to expanding that 6 sectors to 10 sectors, and we've got some very, very big brands involved in our MERGE initiative.
Perfect. And Rocco Perrin, I want to turn it over to you because I think it's great to see cities like Mississauga honing in and bringing different sectors together to come up with a plan for the business community in the area. But when you expand it out on a more macro level, it's easy to do that. How does what Mississauga is doing compare to what you're seeing in Ontario for you, Rocco, and for Canada? Perrin. So maybe let's go to Rocco first, and then to Perrin.
Well, you have similar tables, and not just businesses, but also associations. Something that Perrin does exceptionally well for the movement across the country, because so many businesses at the larger level operate across cities, across jurisdictions, across provinces. And so it's important to have that perspective, and in particular because of the nature of supply chains. And again, it's a point that Perrin has made incredibly forcefully and articulately throughout the crisis, the importance of consistency of rules is heightened by the fact that with integrated supply chains, if you have inconsistency, quite apart from the confusion and additional expense, is that you have unintended consequences down the line, because a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And so bringing those tables together at a local level, at a provincial level, and at a national level, super critical to be able to provide the appropriate advice to policymakers so that we can move forward.
Allo, first of all, it's exciting to see what Mississauga is doing, and what Dave and his team are doing is using the convening power of the local board of trade to be able to bring together a wide variety of players in the community. Same sort of thing as Rocco is doing provincially, and as we're attempting to do nationally. At the end of the day, the role of government is absolutely critical, obviously, in this. But our role as businesses and as associations and as members of the community is also critical. Somebody once said that all politics is local. The same could be said about economic development. Yes, senior levels of government set the broad confines of the environment, but it's important for us at a community level to bring people together and talk about what are our strengths, what are the challenges we face, what is it that each of us brings to the table, whether it's the educational sector or business or government, that can help to encourage development in our community. Rocco's absolutely right that one of the key things that we need to have is coherence across the country. There's simply too much confusion today, confusing standards, confusing requirements that we have. If, for example, Mississauga is on lockdown as a result of decisions made by governments, and the next community over isn't, then you see a distortion in the economy that significantly affects businesses, and particularly smaller businesses. We need to have as much consistency as we can get across the economy so that businesses know where they stand, where citizens know where they stand, and where we move away from simply responding to the pandemic to actually managing it. If we can have coherent strategy and plan it properly during this period over the course of the next year, as the vaccine is being rolled out and as people are getting vaccinated, and as we get ourselves up to the level where there's proper protection, we can actually reduce the level of infection, we can save lives, and we can start to allow people to get their lives back earlier and to reopen the Canadian economy and all of our economies so that we can transition away from a subsidies-based economy to one where both families and individuals and businesses are able to be self-sustaining again. And that should be our goal. As Rocco makes the point, no business exists to live off government. They want the opportunity to be able to function in the economy. And if we're going to restore our economy, we have to reopen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, along with pivot, unintended consequences and incoherence are probably some of the top two most used words by businesses of the day. But I want to turn it back to CWB and Chris and Mark. We talked about these two realities of businesses, these two categories, the ones that are recovering and the ones that are struggling to survive. Are there any gaps that CWB can fill for those that are struggling, or for those that are looking to recover but don't have any kind of coherent plan from government to help them do that?
Right. We focused on that out of the gate as we entered into the very significant GDP decline that we saw in the spring, and we put in place what we called CWB has your back, and we reached out to all of our clients, no matter what portion of the K they were on, the positive slope or the negative slope, and to talk about what did this sort of economic reality mean to them, what would be required for them to kind of take a pause and think about what they required for next steps. And we put in place a bunch of loan payment deferrals that we managed with our client base since, starting in late March, early April, right up to now, where they're virtually all being worked through, and they're down to under 1% now, but we're up about 25% of our loan portfolio at the peak in June. So very, very consistent work, client by client. Parent talk about local solutions, and it is local. I mean, you want to know your client, you want to know their market, their competitors, the reasons they can be successful, their supply chain, to Rocco's point, that all matters. And, you need to know all of that as to be the banker for the SMEs and to provide that support. So we've been very, very client focused to make sure that we can address what those pressures are, and that it is and this is not over, right? Like, we are still in the midst of this. In Alberta, we've gone into another lockdown, I think very similar to the Peel region. So we've got more time to spend and attention to pay to our clients.
Yeah, and Chris, what I would add to that is, it's all those conversations that we're having. And so when you think about even just the Mississauga flavor, we've got 200 years of banking experience for prospects and clients to draw on, so we can provide that expertise to the business owner. And when we think about the future plans, it's really, our deal team sitting down with that business owner, talking about what those short-term needs might be, looking out to the long-term goals, and then coming up with a solution that meets both the short-term and the long-term goals. And so, I hear this a lot now that we're open in Ontario, but I get asked the question, what makes you different at CWB? And, the answer to that is really that we're so laser focused on the business owner. And so we have that focus, we take a partnership view, and we get a deep understanding of the business owner, the company, the markets they're competing in. And that allows us to give that boutique feel that we have for business owners all across Canada. And then the other thing I would say there too is it lets us look through those market cycles. So especially during times like these, there's lots of challenges in front of business owners. And so if you've got a financial partner that takes a long-term view, that's so very valuable. And then I guess the last thing I would say, being that we're new to Mississauga and we opened in August, it's just I've been so pleasantly surprised by the market acceptance that we've seen here. So I think I was telling you, Chris, no one has said no to a conversation with one of our bankers yet since we've opened in August. And what that tells me is there's a large demand from business owners, certainly here in Ontario, and I suspect across Canada as well, for an alternative for business owners. And that's definitely something we're good at CWB.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, and Perrin kind of touched on this in his answer, is that a lot of SMEs, especially the ones in the hardest hit sectors, don't have the same kind of resources. They don't have those deep pockets, and right now they don't necessarily have the capacity or maybe bandwidth to be thinking long term or planning for the future. Many are hanging on by a thin thread and have to face these obstacles and challenges that they've never had to before. In most cases, their rainy day funds are gone and then some. How can CWB help these businesses plan for the future when that future just seems so uncertain and so daunting?
Well, what our focus has been is that triage, understanding what the elements of that business is. And, I would say, we spoke earlier about businesses not wanting to rely on the government, but there has been some good government programs too that have provided some good assistance. So both through the EDC and BDC programs that have allowed structured finance to come into assist in working capital, for example, that is really being beneficial to a lot of clients as we think about the, as they have a base on which they can look to. In today's world, they could have assets they could potentially lever further. They could have some bridge financing that would allow them to sort of make it to that next step. But again, that's a process under which you do need to triage. You need to know your client. And to Mark's point, you need that laser focus on what will make that client successful. And the tools that we will have in that is the experience that we bring to the table. And because we're targeted, we're not all things to all people. We want to be specifically good to those core business owner clients that we know we can support. And that is our goal, is to provide that support.
Great. David, I want to come back to you. We've talked about the amount of opportunity for growth and expansion in Mississauga, and the governments are talking about building back better, so to speak. And for me, I'm curious about how we can do that in Mississauga through some of the issues that existed pre-COVID, things like increasing access to capital for SMEs or expanding the region's import and export infrastructure. What, in your view, should be the medium-term priorities for government to help address some of the opportunities that exist in Mississauga?
Well, from a government perspective, as I mentioned, it's businesses keep saying we need more, we need more. I think we need to get more specific about what government can do. The biggest thing is to create that environment for businesses to succeed. Certainly welcoming CWB into Mississauga. There's certainly some ways that CWB can play a role in the economic recovery. As our surveys showed, the short-term risk is cash flow. It's a concern for businesses, but more importantly, the long-term or the post-COVID risk is access to capital, and this has been an issue for businesses for years and years. So there are two opportunities for CWB to assist Mississauga businesses, especially access to capital for late stage innovation companies. We're not talking about the ones that are, just trying to get off the ground. We're talking about late stage, proven, viable products, services, technologies. That's been a long-standing issue, and we've seen these companies. They move south of the border to Silicon Valley for tech, or they move to Boston for life sciences, and our educational institutions do this amazing job producing and fostering brilliant minds, and then we lose them to other jurisdictions because they can't find the financing they need. So there's an opportunity for CWB to help, but that's also an opportunity for government to help and give some relief to some of these companies to keep them in Canada. When we've already spent all the money on educating them, why let them go?
Mm-hmm. Rocco and Perrin, I mean, I want to throw the same question to you both. What should the medium-term priorities for recovery be for Rocco, Ontario, and for Perrin, Canada? Start with Rocco.
Well, at a certain point, the printing presses blow up. And so it can't just be more money. Governments at all levels will be in dire straits. So there are a number of things. Obviously, the money is important, and not simply more debt for companies, because if you're on the downslope of the K recovery, the math is daunting. It's one thing to, you've been in it 2 months or 3 months and you've built up debt, but you go back to the math that Perrin said around in a good year, restaurants are in low single-digit profit margins. If you've now gone through 9 months, you've burned through your cash, you've accumulated debt, you've levered your assets even more. At a certain point, you do the math and you say, here's what I owe, here's what I can make when I return. How many years will it take me to pay down, even at these low interest rates, and earn a living? And at that point, people just turn the keys over to the landlord and say, I'm done. And sadly, thousands of businesses have already made that determination, and more will make it, because even with the vaccine, we're talking about several months. So there are some harsh realities, and we want to limit that, because the scar tissue of that much bankruptcy will make it far slower for the government to come back. But those near term, I think one of the biggest things is internal free trade in the country. In a world where these governments are not going to be able to cut checks, what are we going to do to reduce barriers so that we take what is already a small Canadian economy relative to the world and make it smaller through inane barriers that have to go? 2, skilling and reskilling our people. David made a great point. We have great institutions. We have to do an even better job of ensuring, not just for our kids, but mid-career, to be able to retrain our people. That's going to be critical to compete in the long term, to build back better, if you will. Thirdly, one thing that has clearly been underscored through all of this is the enormous digital divide. If you're going to compete in the economy of the 21st century, broadband has to be all available. You can't have a policy, as the provincial government does, of digital first, if you don't provide digital capability first. And that's not just for business, that's virtual healthcare, that's training and education. And then comes, a series of tax review, regulation, et cetera. But those would be the big steps to start with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ella,
Perrin?
Ella, as I look at it in terms of the priorities for the medium term, obviously in the short term, we have to look at what sort of supports can be provided by government for small businesses in particular, but for businesses in general across the country. We have to help people get to the other side of the river. What is going to be absolutely critical, though, is we're going to have to move away from a strategy which is shut down and subsidize to one that allows people to regain more of their ordinary lives and that allows us to begin to reopen our economy. And the only way we can do that successfully for the medium term is if we start to manage the disease instead of simply responding to it. And that means having a national COVID management strategy. It needs to be data-based. We need to have much better data than we have today. We need to have a strategy for how we roll out rapid testing. We need to have a very good strategy in terms of what we do with the vaccine, how we distribute it. We should be actively promoting information right now to deal with the disinformation campaigns that there have been about vaccines, because until we get to, most experts believe that we have to get to a vaccination rate of about 70% of the population before we reach a stage where we can really go back to truly normal conditions. And we're looking in that instance to well into next year before we can achieve that, even under the best of circumstances. We need to empower Canadians. If you look at people in Mississauga, in those apartment towers that are there, who feel under enormous pressure, in many cases locked in with families with them, with kids, and just feeling powerless and victimized in many ways. We have to empower people again and make it clear that there are things that each of us can do by using PPEs, by following social distancing, by businesses doing what they can to ensure that their customers, their employees are well protected, by governments working in a coordinated way, that if we manage the disease, we can save lives and we can speed up the day in which we regain our normal lives much more rapidly. That in the medium term is key. We also need to see from governments at all levels what their recovery strategy is. Governments today are very focused on the short term. What do you do during lockdowns? We need to look at how do we move from lockdowns into restoring economic growth and getting things going again. And that's going to be absolutely critical. Bottom line here for business and for society, it's when you see those open for business signs popping up on Main Street again across the country, that then we'll know that we're coming out of the tunnel.
So there are lots of ideas and suggestions there, both for the national, provincial, and local perspective. And Chris and Mark, before we get to our questions from the audience, I wanted to turn it over to you and ask, what role can financial institutions like CWB helping businesses realize some of these opportunities to move from lockdown to recovery while government is still figuring out how to deal with things? Any kind of final words from either of you on that?
Well, I'll start and then pass it to Mark. The great comments by Rocco and Perrin there. I totally agree. I mean, the economy is way bigger than the government's balance sheet, even if you add all the governments up, and the challenge of shutdown and subsidize, that's another good line. You have to remember these are excellent. But there's a lot of management that has to occur for us to rebound effectively. So as we think about it, as we think about our clients and our participation in the economy, it is that proactive, understand the situation, the laser focus on the business owner, understanding, again, all of the component parts of what makes them successful. And when there's a challenge, what are the things that we can do to assist in that appropriate financial solution that allows them to proceed? And it could be they proceed at a slower fashion for a time and then can wrap it up later. Access to capital is just crucial. And our bank started back in the mid-'80s in Alberta when there was no access to capital. And really, that was the genesis of what our focus came to be on the business owner, to make sure that there is capital for business. And that is, again, it's really focused on expertise, focus, understanding, and bringing those all together. I don't know, Mark, if you have some closing comments on that as well.
Yeah, I would just completely agree, Chris, with what you've said, and the real life examples that we're seeing here in Mississauga really prove that out. some of the first prospects that we called on and brought over to CWB, it was all about taking the time to be proactive and understand what that business's and that business owner's challenges were. And again, it's not, this particular example I'm thinking about was a growth story. But he needed a partner to be able to see that longer term plan and look at his goals and provide that capital. So very much on the ground, we're living it, and the market, like I said earlier, is quite receptive to the alternatives that we're providing.
Fantastic. So I just want to say thank you to the panelists. We are going to be moving over to our question and answer period. Our first question is, what are some best practices or examples of support local campaigns that we can take advantage of this winter? Or David, if you want to take that.
Sure. Well, one of the programs that we've put forward in Mississauga is a Made in Mississauga program, which is supporting local businesses. Our Tourism Mississauga has put forward a campaign where if you stay in a hotel overnight, you get a $100 gift card to go and it was to spend at local restaurants, but it could be used for for takeout and delivery as well. So those are a couple of the programs that are local to Mississauga. And of course, we've continued on in our own way with the very successful Canada United program. That was a national program that was administered by the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and we've kept that concept alive as well. So those are a few things that we have. There's also another movement afloat with a business in Mississauga that is putting forward a proposal to local restaurants to do deliveries for a much reduced compensation as well. So those are a few things that we're doing locally.
Perfect. This question is for CWB. Someone's asking, what is your strategy for the Ontario market? Do you foresee yourself growing, expanding? Is Mississauga kind of the initial step? You've been there for a while. Chris or Mark, do you want to speak to any of that?
Oh, absolutely. Ontario's we see as a tremendous diversification story for us as we move from west to east. And, we've got 6 businesses, as I mentioned before, and now the branch in Ontario. We would see there being more branches that would come into play. We also see for the businesses we have existing in Ontario today, the ability for us to expand, say, a single product participation with those clients to full service as digital becomes much more of a currency and how we transact. So is Ontario for us, we set our goal about 5 years ago of being 30-30-30 in the main markets and 30 being BC, Alberta, and Ontario. So we've made great progress to that. We're at 23% today. If we include Quebec, we're at 28%. So we're very close to us realize on that. And we expect the on-the-ground presence where we have full-service opportunity for clients, such as we have in Mississauga now, to be a great catalyst for that continued growth. So it is an important market. We believe we have the right financial solutions, and again, very targeted at that business owner level.
And Chris, I would just add that, from the distribution, it's just really a great opportunity to bring the brand to life with all of that experience and history that we already have in Ontario with our partner companies. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to work with our existing client base as well to help them with whatever goals they have.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic. Our next question is directed a little bit more at actually all of you. The question is, how do we ensure business support organizations that we are working together rather than competing in the same space?
Well, perhaps I can take a stab at that first, Ala. One of the first things that we did at the Canadian Chamber when we saw outbreaks taking place in China and in Italy was to say that we need to come together as a business community to provide information, particularly for SMEs in the country. At the time of SARS, I actually spent most of that time in Mississauga. And as you'll recall, in those days, the GTA was the epicenter for SARS really in the world. And it was abundantly clear that the sector of the economy that was most affected was SMEs in particular. And often they don't have the resources that are necessary to do planning, continuity planning and the like. And so what we wanted to do in advance of COVID was to look at what sorts of resources can all of us in the business community provide, particularly for SMEs, leveraging the resources that we bring to it. So we created the Canadian Business Resilient Network, which includes the 450 chambers and boards of chambers of commerce and boards of trade in our network, plus 100 other associations. The material that we make available, we share each other's information. We are able to exchange best practices. It's available freely. And our goal is to help businesses to survive, not to compete with one another. So this is the principle that we should all be following throughout the course of the pandemic. What can we do to help all businesses? And let's set aside our competitiveness until we get to the other side.
I can just add quickly to that. I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, as it were. Dave mentioned the Canada United. When we launched that, we launched together with Retail Council of Canada, with CFIB, with all of the provincial chambers of commerce and the Canadian Chamber. So I think you see that, you see in the Digital Main Street Initiative, BIAs working with local economic development, working with municipalities, working with chambers of commerce and boards of trade. So again, the example, we have been blessed in Canada, unlike some other jurisdictions where, where we have been coming together. And it's also an appropriate time to give a shout out to governments at all levels, because, quite frankly, government is designed to move slowly, and they've had to move quickly. And the only way that's been possible is to ensure that parties of all stripes and all levels don't take the opportunity to take those, fast policies that are put out. The net result is almost always that they're not perfect and that there are issues. And if the criticism is based on how do we make it better as opposed to how to shoot down the other person, that's where we get through this together in the strongest fashion. And I think, with a few exceptions, that's been happening by and large.
You're absolutely right, Rocco. We've one of the overarching philosophies of the Mississauga Economic Recovery Group is great ideas shouldn't come with an ego. And so we are willing to share. We've reached out to so many organizations. We've capitalized on what Perrin's done at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We've with your permission, we've ripped off and duplicated what you've done at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. We've built links through our own areas. We've connected with CME. CME is resident in Mississauga. We've connected with them to find out what they're doing, what's the city doing, and we're very, very open and sharing information. So I think that's one of the biggest encouragements that I've seen within this, within the pandemic, and how we're going to get to the other side with economic recovery, is the willingness of all of these organizations that may have competed before Not that our family would compete, but other organizations that may have thought that they were competing with us before, we're now sharing information. I think that's critical for us.
There's a wonderful saying, and it bears repeating, and that is, it's amazing what you can get done when it doesn't matter who gets the credit.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would just want to echo, how great it is to see everyone coming together. And I think even this webinar is an example of us being able to share ideas and thoughts and across all the entire chamber network. So I just think it's great, and kudos to everyone for all their hard work during this pandemic. One other question here we have is, what is the most effective and impactful statistic or fact that chambers of commerce or boards of trade can stress and use in our communications with communities? I'm sure you all have a never-ending list of stats and facts, but if maybe you want to share your top favorite, and I would also invite all of our members to visit our websites to information. But why don't we start with you, Rocco? Just your first up on my screen here.
I think the top fact is relative to shopping with any other business. When you shop locally, a far greater percentage of your money ends up staying in the community, and that logic is critical to rebuild, to A, saving our main streets and our small businesses, and B, growing at the back end of this.
Perrin?
For me, Ala, the greatest message that we have to give to people is that we're all in this together, and that if we all work together, if we all do our parts, that we can manage this disease, and that we can reopen the economy, and we can get our lives back much more quickly. If we all do our part in terms of mask wearing, in terms of use of the app, and in terms of social distancing, if business does its part to protect employees, to protect customers, if governments do their part in ensuring that the policies they have support the business community and protect public health as well, we can control the disease during the time that we're waiting for vaccination to be complete, and we can be much more successful in getting our ordinary lives back. But the key is we're all in it together. We all have to do our part.
Perfect. David?
I wish I had something more value to add to those two comments, Ala, but those two comments were eloquent and full of impactful information. So I have nothing intelligent to add to that.
Download the COVID Alert app. If you haven't done it already, do it right now. Help our frontline healthcare workers track and trace this disease so we can manage it and not react to it.
Perfect. Mark and Chris, is there anything further that either of you want to add?
Well, I agree. Like, shop locally and great collaboration. We're in it together. Those are fantastic themes. Yeah. Mark, anything you'd add to that?
No, again, just like the prior comments, they stand on their own, so I won't add any more because they're great as they are.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, with that, we have come to the close of today's discussion. We've obviously covered a lot of ground today through a very fruitful and engaging discussion. For any questions about today's presentation or about partnering with CWB, reach out to Mark, whose contact details are up on the screen right now. Mark and Chris, just once again, I want to thank you on behalf of the Canadian Chamber for CWB Financial's ongoing support. Rocco, David, and Perrin, thank you so much for the hard work that you're all doing on advocating on behalf of businesses nationally, provincially, and locally, and for taking the time to join us here today. And of course, on behalf of the Canadian Chamber, I would just want to say a big thank you to everyone who joined us. You can learn more about our efforts and access additional resources on our website, which is chamber.ca. So with that, I will say happy holidays to everyone and have a great afternoon.